Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our concepts edition for the week. I'm Devin Bedoni of Like and Precision.
And I'm Uriel Eisen of Austere Manufacturing.
And before we jump into everything today, we have a bit of an appeal. Our goal when we started this podcast was to make lean manufacturing principles more accessible, understandable, exciting to small businesses and small business people, and not strictly in the manufacturing or metalworking space. So we have a quick appeal, which is that if you are someone who listens and you are not in the metalworking space specifically, if you would take a few minutes and just write us a quick email with your interests, what industries you work in or have worked in or want to work in, anything that would be the basic thing. Even if it's a one-liner like, hey, I listen, I work on a small farm. Hey, I listen, I work in a hospital. That's great. If you want to throw in any other additional information about what you might find interesting or not, we are trying to tailor this a little bit better to our audience. And we know there's a lot of machinists and metalworkers who listen, but we think there's actually quite a lot of people outside that space, but we don't know who you are or how many of you are out there. So shoot us a quick email or Instagram message or whatever. Say hi.
And the email is fixsomethingtoday@gmail.com. And in addition, I mean, everyone who is in metalworking, it would also be super interesting to hear from you guys if you want.
Absolutely.
With what you do and what is interesting in the podcast. And really what we're trying to figure out for the people who are not from a machining background is when we do these deep dives in machining, how is that annoying? Is it interesting, or is it sort of neutral? In making this podcast, we are trying to sort of show, as we've described, like show the process of applying lean, show our struggles. And I think the issue, I don't know if it's an issue. The reality is both of us have a machining business.
Yep.
And so when we bring up examples of how this is getting applied, that often comes up. And so it's nice to hear the in the weeds part and not just the theoretical, because if you just want the theory, you can go read a book.
Yep.
But on the flip side, when we start talking about work coordinate systems and G54.2 and for 5 minutes, how annoying is that, or is that interesting? And if you are a machinist and find that very interesting, please write in as well. It would just be great to hear from everyone about why you listen to the podcast, what your background is, where what industry you work in, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And once again, if you don't want to write a super long thing and just want to do a one-liner, that's also super valuable.
Absolutely. Better something than nothing at all. Yeah. And again, that's fixsomethingtoday@gmail.com.
And that email is also in the show notes if you want to not figure out how to spell that and just copy and paste. On that note, we'll jump into our normally scheduled programming. And you have a quote for us?
I do. I learn each day what I need to know to do tomorrow's work. From Arnold Toynbee? Historian?
Sounds British.
Yeah.
I stuck this in there. It comes out of Toyota Kata, of course. And I think this kind of falls in the context of the sort of like event horizon is not the right word, but horizon, space understanding horizon. I don't know what you'd call it.
Yeah, something like that.
Of trying not to plan outside of like what you are capable of figuring out with what you know.
Yeah, what you
currently
legitimately know, not what you think you know.
Yeah, exactly. And I forget what the context was. I think this historian was like notably like productive or something in his ability to like go through history and like anyway, he was renowned for being a very, very capable in his work and producing a lot of work, I think. And this was kind of like this was his methodology, apparently.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I think it's really good for everything that we've been talking about, for not getting ahead of yourself, making small changes, and focusing on learning.
Yeah, and I think the reason it kind of jumped out to me to stick in this week's episode is because exactly this has been really on my mind a lot. We've been struggling with some very like hairy design problems where you just know the second you get 5 minutes in that you might be right and you might be completely wrong. And so I think there's a tendency to just, and that it's going to be a lot of work to try Rev 1. Yeah. And so instead you sort of do nothing.
Yeah. I feel like there's a word for that when there's like
decision paralysis or something.
Well, there's that, but there's like specifically working in like a space with a lot of unanswered, like ambiguous. Shoot, I'm just doing a bad job now.
Well,
there's like oh geez, what is that phrase? It'll come back to me later. I'm gonna stop interrupting you.
And so I have a few specific examples, and basically we've actually managed to make pretty substantial progress in the past week or two, and that has mostly been by sort of stepping back and saying, okay, instead of trying to solve this problem, let's figure out what we kind of need to put in place to make iterating easier.
Yeah.
And so the few examples I have were at our assembly station. So it was very clear that it needed a redesign. I think I mentioned that we did a sort of an audit last week. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very clear it was not working well. I stepped into the cell and did some, and like beyond, well, this was interesting from a number of reasons, but beyond just like I'm not as familiar with the process, like it's not really muscle memory. So so it made everything even worse, I would say. Mm-hmm. But just very clear, like everything needed to be moved around, but then you start laying out a new layout and you're like, okay, we'll do this. And you kind of have to be a little bit, maybe inexperienced or something to have a high degree of confidence that new concept is going to be like, it might create as many problems as it solves kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or even if it's a step in the right direction, it might be a lot of steps in the wrong direction also simultaneously. So you like fixed what you knew about, found new issues, and worst of all, it's going to be a lot of building to get there, right? So it's like, let's build a new table and let's remove these shelves and put up a different type of shelf and put it in a slightly different position, and on and on and on. So that was one. And so what we did instead was we decided to build it in MakerPipe. And start with just a small portion. So we sort of broke the whole thing into different segments and then built a cart that is just one piece of it, which is sort of our where products go into the packages.
Yeah.
And built that cart. And so a few nice things about MakerPipe, and this is not really an endorsement or whatever, it's just what we chose for the following reasons. The material is fairly cheap. And so if you cut, like, whenever I go to build something, it's like, okay, what dimensions does this want to be? And then you're like, do I really want to cut down some like expensive wood or steel and then weld it up? And then we have a table. And if I decide that I want it 2 inches smaller or 3 inches bigger, even harder, right? Like you're just kind of stuck. And so you end up not doing anything.
You don't have a board stretcher?
I should build one. And so the nice thing about the cheap material is that it just, like, from a dollar perspective is less of a hurdle, but then also just from a waste perspective, we now just take any projects that become obsolete in MakerPipe, and unless it's a really short segment, we just put it in a bin, and you're always pulling parts, right?
Just becomes part of the Lego box.
Yeah, and so each time maybe you have a few inches of scrap, right? Where like we took a 14-inch piece and we needed an 11-inch piece, so 3 inches goes in the recycling. Right. But it's a very easy system from a waste perspective. And then if you want a shelf to be half an inch lower, normally you'd kind of be like, if you built that in wood, it's just enough of a problem that you're not going to just do it to try. Mm-hmm. You're kind of going to want to be pretty sure you want it half an inch down.
Yeah.
And so I don't really have a lot to report on the experimentation phase yet,
Mm-hmm.
but it just felt like a really nice step to take because we've been chewing on this for a long time, and it's just we haven't made much progress.
I think the key here is like again, kind of backing up, the fact that you don't have anything to report yet isn't actually the important part. The important part is that you made a step.
I think definitely, but
the
I
important
also
part
think
here is that you took the step and now you will have something to report back.
Yeah, I think
that
it's
you wouldn't have
taking
probably.
the step, but also just forgetting about the goal of solving the problem as the first order of business, and instead coming up, like trying to identify why it is that we have such difficulty iterating.
Yeah.
And solving that problem, and then the rest will kind of follow.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where my head's been at. Similarly, we had a big win on the CNC we've been on the phone a few times this week thinking through adding tools to our CNC and the fact that they don't all fit in the tool changer, which I think we'll get into a little later. But what I realize is that part of the hurdle with all of this is that if you make a change to anything that might have cascading changes to other parts we run or other processes, that it becomes very paralyzing because you're kind of like, okay, if I change this, I need to then make sure it doesn't have those effects.
Yeah.
And then I need to get it to a point where we're done experimenting, so we're back in business.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead, to solve this problem, which is essentially information holding or propagation or something, of being like, I made a change to this part, it could have a knock-on effect on part B, and I don't have the time to test part B. What do I do?
Right.
Do I hold it in my head? Do I set aside enough time to test part A and part B? So instead we laminated a bunch of yellow index cards so we can write on them with dry erase, put a huge stack of them next to the programming computer and next to the CNC. And so now anytime you make changes or like a tool breaks on one part and you realize it could have an effect on like that part should get extra QC next time you run it, you write on the card and put it on the setup sheet. So next time it gets run, even if that's in 3 weeks, no one needs to hold it in their head as like, oh, we should pay attention to this. And you can write anything you want
on the setup sheet for that other part.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can kind of just like get it out of your head and know that it's going to get addressed later. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we're going to create new issues with this, like, oh, I thought I would know what I meant by this cryptic message, but I don't. So I have been, I've been dating stuff. I've been like trying to be pretty descriptive, but again, that just sort of feels like it lets us play and learn a little more because you don't have to suddenly solve this humongous interconnected problem all at once.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. When I was designing more, like complete machines and like custom tools and machine solutions and stuff, designing and building, I would find I'd get to this paralysis point often where a bunch of like undefined solution spaces would converge.
Right.
Basically. Right. And like the classic one I remember was building this bottling machine and trying to figure out how to get all the caps aligned in the same direction. And being like, well, I have this idea, but I can't test it without building this other thing. I think now I would probably approach it differently and would do a better job at kind of like chunking this out into solvable experiments.
Yeah.
But even so, at the time, it was this very difficult thing where I was like, okay, but I'm going to build this thing and I might not know if it works for a week, kind of a thing.
Right.
And I don't know how to, but so I think this is something that we experience across the board. And like before we started recording, I was mentioning to you that building a house,
which I'm doing
currently. Right now.
Yeah.
And I'm not a house builder. Like I know enough to get myself into trouble, basically. Or I know enough. I keep saying I know enough to know all the things that I don't know.
That's good.
Which is good, but you still have to go figure out what those things are, or you have to solve the problems. And so I keep kind of coming to these points where it's like, okay, time to start plumbing. All right. I've got to get 30 pipes into that hole. Go.
Right.
And do have to just kind of like start breaking it down. But I forget where I was going with that. I think just the convergence of undefined solution spaces in one spot is what becomes really challenging.
Yeah. So last week I was really feeling just very stuck on this.
Yeah.
And so what I ended up doing is just sitting down with a piece of paper and writing down the series of experiments that I needed answers to, because it can start feeling very paralyzing, because it's like, well, I don't know if this tool will work on this part, and I don't know if this other tool works in this example. Yeah. And all of those held in your head at once feel very, like you just get stuck. But if you break it down, it's like, all right, I know how to test question 1, and I know how to test question 2. And so I kind of just went through that yesterday and today.
And then I could be wrong here, but based on our conversations, it sounds like what you sort of came to was opening up your constraints a little bit.
Yeah. Again, optimizing for
flexibility and
rather
learning.
than, Yes and no. Yes, that's where I've settled. But in the process of running these experiments, I found a way to fit all of the tools into the tool changer without doing tool changes. But we're still going to move in the direction of making tool changing viable.
Right.
So.
And are you going to do tool changing in the interim as you like converge back into this new, like the struggle, right, is like you're going to have overlapping tool numbers. I could see kind of a rolling change where you figure out how to do tool changes, and then as time goes on, you convert all of your programs via these tool changes to your new universal library. And now you've learned how to have a more compact universal library and do tool changes for in the future when you end up eventually needing more.
Yeah. So to get everyone up to speed, basically we're releasing a product hopefully in a week and a half on the 17th. And we have a 21 tool changer in our CNC. And right now we don't have to do any tool changes except for the gripper fingers between running part 1 and part 2, and adding this new set of parts. It was seemingly not possible to just use all of our existing tools. Like we had to add 3 tools to the tool library, and we didn't have the space for it. And so there's sort of a question of conflicting desires of getting the right tools in the library, having fairly error-proof changeovers where you make a change, and if you forget to change one of the tools, do you crash the machine or does it alarm out? Also, like SMED sort of says, or from a trying to get changeover times really, really fast, having standard tooling is a huge plus.
Yeah.
On the flip side, having standardized tooling means when someone sends you a link to a mill that might just work a lot better, and like our roughing mill right now is a bit of a pain point, and we found one that I think is going to do much better, but I don't really want to have to test it and go through every single product we run and make sure it works before we go like, okay, yes, this is our new roughing mill.
Yeah.
And so like back to the like optimizing for learning question, if we stick to exclusively standard tooling, then it becomes kind of a headache.
Yeah. It's kind of the classic, we need a name for whatever the graph would be that's like optimized for speed, but inflexible, versus optimized for versatility, but slow.
Yeah, so it's basically, my brother Noam, who's in aviation, talks about like bell curves for different missions as an aircraft, right? If the mission is, the more specific it gets, the narrower it gets, also the taller it can get, where it's super optimized for that one area. Yeah. And as you spread it out, it becomes less optimized, it becomes less awesome, but also way more, like its spread is way, way better. And I feel like we've seen that a lot with standardization and systems, where it's sort of like the super rigid systems are awesome in that they're super optimized. Yeah. But they're really, if they're too rigid, they become really stifling. If you need to break them, then it's kind of worse than not having the system, because everyone thinks the system exists. Like for us, we don't check the tool library. Right. Ever. Yeah. So suddenly it's like, all right, now you have to check it sometime. That is no good.
It's kind of like what your business looks like too, right? Like that super optimized narrow bell curve like you said, it does this one thing really good, but there's not a lot of space under the curve.
Yeah.
Like if you're a generalist business, you should probably focus on solutions that create a lot of space under that curve. And if you're a very like directed, couple, like your business for the most part is very oriented towards a handful of products, you can really narrow down and not need a huge amount of area under the curve.
Yeah.
But make those few things very highly optimized.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I guess to us, like running, like if you read SMED by Shigeo Shingo, there's a lot of discussion about the impact across an organization of small batches, and small batches are often predicated on changeover times and setup times. And so like there is the reality of like, if we make this a 15 or 20 minute setup time instead of a 3-minute setup time, there is going to be a desire to do fewer changeovers every day.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you are losing that edge of being hyper specialized. And then if you think about, I mean, this is sort of interesting from a lean perspective.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about getting us, like I've sort of thought, okay, well, we're probably going to need a second machine soon, which I've been threatening for quite a while. So we'll see what happens.
Ever since you got the first one.
Yeah. If we can get a night run, we won't need one for a while. But if we get a second machine, one way to solve this problem is sort of to break out different families of parts on different machines, but then you lose versatility. So now if one machine goes down, you're kind of dead in the water on some of your parts, and this is why Toyota runs one of the reasons Toyota runs multiple parts or multiple car models on one assembly line instead of doing the easy thing of building like one specialized assembly line. I think it was a lesson learned from 2008 when their trucks and SUVs went down, and suddenly all the workers associated with that line couldn't add value to the company. In building products to sell. So
interesting.
I don't know what that leaves us, but I guess on the theme of sort of building systems to learn instead of building systems to like, instead of like trying to solve a problem, trying to give yourself the room to learn about the problem, I think. That's I think where we're kind of settling on the tool changing question.
I think it's room to learn, but also like they need to move the needle as well in making more clarity for everybody engaging with that system. So, but I think usually those two things go together, hopefully.
I mean, I think like this is why like 3D printing has been super impactful to engineering companies, because suddenly deciding you want to hold the thing in your hand isn't going to be 3 weeks and $5,000 in your prototyping shop. Instead, it's like, you come back the next morning and you can hold it in your hand. Is it sort of rough plastic that kind of sucks? Yes. Can you hold it in your hand? Also, yes. And like that's just so powerful and shouldn't be underestimated. And similarly, I think driving down that threshold for like making changes and just seeing and like trying new things, I think is like really, really beneficial.
We're also kind of, I mean, we're trying to tackle a lot of stuff right now, moderately successfully, and kind of came across the same thing with tool management. I think we may have talked about this a little bit, where we didn't really there was no clear, like, so our tool management, basically we have a unique ID. We have a lot of tools. Like I haven't counted them, but it's probably 500-ish tools in the library or something.
That is a lot of tools.
I mean, obviously like to keep those all set up would be expensive and require a lot of space, etc. And most of those are tools that we don't use very often, but I don't want to have to remake them in the library every time I want to program with them.
Right. And just for the listener who are not machinists, a tool holder is like maybe $200 on average.
I mean,
so that's $100,000.
That puts it in perspective. So we have a limited number of tool holders, and then we've tried to define what were standard tools that we would like to keep in a tool holder, and what are these other ones that we want to keep defined
As like, if you are going to build this up, here's how it gets built.
Yeah,
so you don't have to reinvent it every time.
Exactly. Here's the tool. Here's how far you want to stick it out of the holder. This is what holder you want to use.
Yep.
But we didn't have a clear like trigger for when to make a tag that says that this holder and this tool are built up, and this is the identification on it for if it's in a machine or if it's on the bench. And so what we were finding is that it just wasn't happening. So there was still all of these tools floating around that nobody really knew what they were. And our newest employee, Aiden, had the great idea of just putting whiteboard sticker tape.
That's awesome.
On the tags. And when you set it up, you write it.
Right.
When you break it down, you wipe it off. And that way the barrier is gone.
Yeah, and to speak to it is irrational, I would say, but it is still very much real. Like, the way we have it is I printed out a bunch of stickers that just have all the fields you should fill out, and then you just grab a pen and fill it out, and you stick the sticker on.
Yeah.
Sounds easy.
Yeah.
But it is an additional step compared to a whiteboard. Like, I'm going to buy some of that whiteboard sticker because, like, I do feel like it's a few extra steps, and so you're kind of like, well, I'm just prototyping with this tool. I'll just have it for a second.
Yeah.
instead of just grabbing a marker and writing and then wiping it off, it's
a few extra steps. I think the more, which, like, we didn't really think about this when we started. Classic example, right, of like trying to design the perfect system and not understanding. The step of writing it out wasn't really the difficult part. But the challenging part was then, once you break that tool down, where does that tag go in a way that it's easy to find again when you set that tool up again? And I think what was happening is someone was like, well, I don't, like, this is just going to be this one job, like you're just saying. I probably won't ever find this tag again, or it probably won't ever come through again. And even if it did, it'd probably be hard to find it in this stack of random tags.
Right.
So what's the point? And so I think a lot of the like knock-on effects were the ones that were really actually kind of holding us back.
Interesting.
Right, like the stickers were pre-printed. The tags were pre-3D printed. Everything was right there, ready to go.
Right. We have the same thing.
It was a management system of the information once it had been put on the tags that was really the sticking point.
Yeah. Interesting. I wonder, this is probably a bad idea.
Yeah.
So jump right to solutions. Having 500 slots in some storage, like that's 1 through 500, where tags can go live. I don't know if that would help.
I think,
or would it just be too much?
I think it would be too much, and also like then what happens when you add 501 tools?
We just add a slot to the end.
I mean, yeah, I know there is an answer, but I guess what the point being that it's like that's a solution that eventually gets large. Like that's a problem that just gets larger and larger as your problem gets larger, instead of being a problem that can stay contained. Yeah. And flexible, even if the scenario changes a lot.
Totally. Yeah, I know for me, I guess it's tempting to have like all the tap tags. Yeah. Kind of pre-printed, but as you're saying, we run into the same thing where it's like we don't actually have a system or a place for those tags to live, and so they kind of float around, which is more confusing because sometimes you find one and you're like, "Uh-oh, yeah, what was this meant to be on, or did we undo the tool?"
Yeah, and we're still like, and I've been threatening to deal with this for quite a while now, figuring out how to handle when we do sometimes have to break down a standard tool. And like, how do we track that tool and the tag to make sure that they end up in a holder again? Which right now just kind of is like someone has to remember. Which is not a great solution. Right. And that's being driven by the fact that right now, I don't think we really have enough holders for the number of tools and machines that we're running. So we need to solve that part of this, Yeah. We need to solve that. And that's not like a ever expanding. That's just like a discord between what we are saying is a standard and what we actually have room for as standards. So that's driving some of those issues.
Are those Kanban?
The holders?
Yeah. I wonder if that would help. And it would only get
No.
triggered if you didn't have stuff to unpack, to unbuild. Non-standard tools that, anyway.
Like empty holders in a drawer?
If you couldn't find an empty holder to I would imagine there's a space for, we use this tool and it needs to get disassembled. Like tool holder from tool.
Yeah.
If there's nothing in that queue that can alleviate my problem and there's nothing I can find, then I would trigger the Kanban to say, let's order another one.
Oh, that's a good idea.
It would sort of just make sure that there's
interesting
feedback of.
Yeah, we do actually have a task list on our A3 to-do board of how are we going to figure out how many holders, what types, and what sizes we actually need instead of me just being
this would organically do that, I guess.
Yeah, instead of me just being like, I think we need
I'll
one more of these.
Yeah.
It is a little bit, right? To start that, I would have to buy one of each of what we currently use to have in the Kanban.
No, you just add a tag in the shop and you say, if you can't find this tool holder and you need this tool holder, put that tag in the bin of to order and I'll order it or something.
Yeah. Interesting.
So I guess given the beginning of our podcast today, I feel like we're deep in the weeds here on machining. And I guess to maybe make this more generalizable.
Yes.
And I think it's worth doing even for our own heads is sort of, I think that where we both were early on before starting this is treating everything as a one-off job where you kind of build the tool you need and essentially no systemization, just mental effort and occasional mistakes or something. And then at some point it's oh, wait a second. There are a lot of permutations here, but they are finite. And when you get down to it, it's for me, it's in the tens. For you, it's in the hundreds of possible permutations that you can actually define, and you can capture the data of what the tool holder is, what the tool that goes in it, how far it sticks out, all those things. I think there's a lot of places where this is true and the same logic applies.
Yeah.
Like how you engage with a customer or something. It's every customer interaction feels unique and new, but it's at the end of the day, there's probably only a certain number of permutations and there is certain information that needs to get exchanged and those happen in a certain order or should. And so, I guess wrestling with the specifics of these systems, I feel is kind of critical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm sure there's a lot of people who have other tools that they build and no designation of whether they're standard or non-standard or how they're meant to get set up for different jobs. And it just feels like something you can train. I'm super aware in the shop, and it's always a little bit of a bummer to me when I train Sam on something. I'm this should be either apparent, right? It should have a visual next to it that shows you how to set something up. Or we should be videoing that training and logging that. And sometimes it's just, and we've fallen off of it for sure, but we've done a lot of videos. Anyway, I'm this exchange, I think it was Pearson on their, on the
Lean Built
podcast was talking about different types of interactions or different types of trainings, which I thought was nice to designate.
Yeah.
And there was sort of the one-on-one.
It was face to face.
Yeah. And being the most expensive.
Yeah.
And then there's I forget, synchronous where you're all learning something together.
Yeah.
I don't remember all of them, but, yeah, the face-to-face one I think comes super naturally to us.
Right. We're pretty well built for it.
Yeah. It's hey, Devin, can you teach me how to use this tool? And you're as a nice person, yes, I can. Let me help you with that.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah. Interesting. One thing that we've been dealing with, and I'm not really sure what our solution space is going to look like at all yet. I feel like and forgive me, I don't think we've talked about this yet, but visibility into status in the process is kind of coming to the forefront as a problem again, where we've done a lot to see we've done a lot of work to see where each individual part number is in the process in the shop.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Are you talking about like a job for a customer?
Yeah.
And then you have that big job board and you sort of move them across?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've done a really good job now of kind of like tracking like where each part number is in its own status.
Okay.
As an individual unit. But what we're really not doing a good job right now of doing is designating who needs to do what in the shop.
Okay.
And what of all of those different things is highest priority.
Yes.
Because, not to let myself off the hook here, but there is still a lot of variability in terms of due dates, priorities. So like we can sort of like work in some way we can work on sort of like a standard priority list of like this comes before this, and then you work on that process.
Right.
Like whatever if something needs to be programmed, you program it. If something needs to be sawn, you saw it.
Right.
If something needs to be set up, you set up. But there's like every day there's exceptions. And so I'm trying to figure out how to create better visibility for everyone in the shop so that it's not something that I'm doing a personal shuffle on in my head to direct.
Yeah. Are there specific, I have a few thoughts. Are there specific stations or something where you notice the problem?
No, it's not quite like that. I think there's just a lot of like,
I know what you're talking. We have the same thing where it's like we get in the shop in the morning. There's nowhere you can look specifically to go like, okay, here's what I'm going to do first. Here's what I'm going to do second.
Yeah.
Then I'll do this. Then I'll do that.
Yeah, I think my employees are having to do a fair amount of juggling in their heads.
Yeah.
And then there's times where I'm like, why are they working on that? Oh, it's probably because I said that yesterday, but the situation has changed. Now this is a priority. Or whatever. Someone just felt like that was the most pressing thing for one reason or another. Which is no fault of theirs. It's like you can't.
Right.
Like I didn't communicate clearly.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to try and figure out what I think we can actually get quite a bit better with sort of a standard flow that we have not implemented yet.
I was going to say, I have no idea what the answer is.
Yeah.
And I think the temptation is, if you're in the planning phase, to go like, this is the go and see part of PDCA.
Yeah.
Well, it's not PDCA, but of A3.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to write off solutions because you know they're going to fail.
Yeah.
But it would actually be very informative to know exactly where they fail.
Yeah.
So I bet if you did, like, and in saying this, I should really be saying it to myself.
Yeah.
Put a standard list of like, we do this, then we do that, then we do that. And then we loop that through the day or something like that.
Yeah.
I bet it would be very clarifying because suddenly you'd be like, we have this order wrong. Right.
Right.
Or, I mean, getting back to the the playbook from Starbucks.
Right.
Like, it might be that you need like 4 standards.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, hey, we all know, I don't know how, collectively, that like we have a rush job in the mix, or we have I don't know what the classifications would be that would sort of change that playbook.
Yeah.
Like for us internally, it would probably be something around like large orders.
Yeah.
Because like on large orders, and this might be a no-no from a lean perspective, but right now, like we have a large order and it's going to be rushed once we get this custom webbing that they want.
Uh-huh.
And so we are producing all the buckles ahead. Uh-huh. Which, I don't know, feels reasonable. Like we have the order. We've been paid for it.
Yeah.
Like we just want to be able to turn it around and ship as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And so when we have large orders, I think it is useful. Like maybe it would be useful to just like be able to designate that that's what's happening in the shop.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like maybe, I guess I would just say like try to standardize an order and then see how it fails. And I think the real failure would be if you guys make adjustments without documenting it, which is so easy to do. It's like when we do face-to-face training without documenting it. because you're like, well, I'm in a hurry. I'm going to change this slightly because I know we should.
Right.
And then not make a note about it and not have a conversation the next day about why that was. And
yeah,
I guess, I mean, we have the same issue. So
yeah, I think really that, like, kind of harkening back, I think the issue is I haven't implemented anything yet because it feels like such a big problem, and I just need to break it down into some smaller chunks.
Yeah, and maybe you standardize the first 3 hours of the day or the first hour, right, and start there.
I think it's actually even simpler than that. I think it just needs to be like, if you find yourself wondering what to do, look at this thing and start with like, is this being done? No. Or yes. If no, then do this first. If yes, skip to the next.
Interesting. So that would be more like if you find you're not, yeah. So if you find yourself at a loss for what to do, this would just be sort of like a cheat sheet to get back on task faster. Is that the problem? Like
I think it would be like a sort of like if you're questioning a priority, here is the flow chart for figuring out what is highest priority.
I bet it'd be super fun to, like, interesting and informative to even make that flow chart. Right. You'd be like,
yeah,
is this above that? I don't know. I would guess.
Yeah. I think it would have to end up being a few flow charts, kind of like, like we were talking about with the playbooks, basically.
Right. So for us, and this, I don't know why we've fallen off of wondering about this, but it might be because I'm less involved in production. And now Sam, as a traditionally good employee, is just like handling it. Right. Which is awesome. Great, except that it's hiding problems, I guess. Like, I used to wonder about having like a big status board of all the processes in the shop next to each other, and it would be awesome if there was like a finishing time for each of them or something, and then it would be like you could glance at it, and if any of them were red or if any of them were a certain threshold, they need immediate tasks, and they could sort of be broken out by which things run on their own with long lead times, which things just have long lead times. Which things are more, I don't know, maybe like 3 tiers of urgency generally, but it starts to get really complicated in terms of like, what is all the information you need to put into something visually to make it very clear at a glance where you should be focusing your effort in the next 10 minutes. Is really tough. And
there's like knock-on effects where we had this kind of today where like we have a rush job that we want to start tomorrow.
Okay.
But yesterday, the job that's on that machine, if you were to look at its status, you're like, oh, this isn't due for a while. This isn't a priority. I'll focus on this other thing. So you kind of have to be looking like a few steps ahead while simultaneously looking at the step, kind of like what's on the machines today, but then also looking upstream and saying, okay, what's the effect if this delays?
I see what you're saying. So in that example, it was a rush because it had to get off the machine so that a rush job could get on the machine.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I think one thing I saw, I'm forgetting the name, on YouTube, it was in a shop tour. And I think we've talked about this before, but they added a board at each CNC that had 5 slots on it. And every time a job was really ready to run, all the paperwork would get put up on this board. And it was a very visible board. It was big. It was probably like 3 feet by a foot or something. Divided. And then you'd hang the paperwork for the job in each slot. And so at a glance, their bottleneck was essentially their CNCs. At a glance, from the office, you could see if any of the machines were approaching no work. And if they were, then the programmers need to go program. And the issue it was solving was twofold. One was overproduction in the programming department, where people would get way out ahead. They'd be like, oh, I'm just going to bang through a whole bunch of programming. But if that board is full, don't program anymore, because people would start programming jobs that weren't actually settled, finalized yet. They're like, well, let me get a jump on it. It'll probably be something like this. And also, while they were doing that, they might, like you're saying, not be looking ahead at other machines that are low on work. And so to them, like, that's why I was asking about specific tasks that were problematic around the shop, because then it's sort of like the bottleneck question. optimize your bottleneck, and then what's the word? Subjugate,
yeah.
all other processes to that bottleneck. Like having a very easy visual of the status of that bottleneck would be useful, but I don't think that's really the question, right? It's sort of like a sequencing / urgency / timing question.
Yeah, and once again we come to the scale thing, where it's like we don't have people for each process, for each operation in the process.
That doesn't feel like, I've heard that a lot. I don't feel like that's a real differentiator, because no one does. Like, no one has an operator at every single process. Like, what company you know what I mean? Not to say.
Well, I mean, Toyota kind of does, right? Like,
no.
You've got an operator at every spot on an assembly line, and you have people supporting them in addition.
Yes, but some of those people are going to do multiple tasks, because each task is not a full-time thing.
Yeah.
And there is still a question about, I mean, okay, maybe it's a total capacity question.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Not that I need to have a person for every machine and every operation in the whole process, but that I do think, I think this is changing right now, but I do think we have been understaffed. So there has been necessarily gaps, and the question of which gap to fill when has been ongoing.
Yeah, but unless you had egregious amounts of overcapacity in manning, that would still ideally be sort of a question.
It would still be, yeah.
And if it's not a question, I think you'd want to look at what's going on there. It also makes me think that if that limiting factor is moving around, that would be a really good argument for looking hard at what is causing, like, at production leveling.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's basically spikes of demand moving through your system at different times, and that is difficult to manage.
Yeah.
But I don't know how you would do production leveling.
Well, I think, like we've discussed in the past, we can't, or at least at this time, I can't envision a way in which we can, match all of our production so that setups don't coincide. But I think what we can do is try and make as much of that setup external as possible, so that can happen whenever there are gaps in anybody's kind of workload, and make the setups as short as possible so that they have less impact on the total throughput.
Yeah. And
that's kind of what we're working on, or it's kind of what we're thinking about right now. To say we're actually working on it is maybe a stretch, but and I liked what you said about that company who had the things at the CNCs. We have so far resisted having the actual information tags or work orders or work slips, whatever you want to call them, move around the shop.
Gotcha.
Which I'm not sure is the right move, but right now I think it's helpful for us to have it all in one place so it can be viewed in totality.
Would duplicates get you, or shadow documents in different colors, or with a designator so you knew which one was which, or something like that?
Possibly. I feel like,
because to me, a big part of the point of Kanban is, one of the 6 rules of Kanban is that nothing should travel without a Kanban.
Right.
And so you're sort of, I'm sure it's useful, but I wonder what would happen if you did start to move things. It might solve some of the problem of showing you cues in different spots.
Yeah.
Another thought is going back to your tool holder question, instead of adding Kanbans to tool, you could just add a list on a whiteboard of all the tool holders you guys own and be like, if you're ever looking for one, just go add a tick mark next to that one.
Yeah.
Similarly, if you wrote out a list, which I think you sort of have on your job board, of processes, you could sort of say, go add a tick mark anytime you go to a process and it's occupied, or something like that, and start to gather data about where those hangups are. Because the other thing is there's two, you have equipment and you have people. There's a lot of ways of cutting this up, but if you have equipment and people, like we've sort of talked about this, like that weighting equipment is substantially cheaper than weighting people.
Yeah.
And that we tend to look at it the opposite way.
Right.
Like what would happen if you had like 10 more mills in your, not that you're going to, but this minute, but if you had 10 more milling machines, like how would that change the way you operate, and would you start
with my same number of people?
Yeah. Like, would that change?
I'd have 10 idle mills.
What would you, or would you be able to sort of go set up another one while the other one is still running, and that would sort of let you start that thing while that one is running?
No, I think we'd have 10 idle mills.
Okay, well, yeah. I mean, that's informative. That's funny.
At least with our current processes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So it's a person.
I think it's a personnel constraint.
Yeah.
I think that is changing. Again, like I said, we've hired another person, and they're great and still getting up to speed on some of the aspects of the business. And we're trying to train some of my former employees up into new processes that are outside their comfort zones. So we're kind of in this awkward teenager, like, switcheroo phase. But I do think that once we get through that, we're going to be much closer to being at a match, more or less match capacity between our personnel and our machinery.
And so does that mean that you are mostly like constrained on programming and proving out stuff?
Currently, yes, but that's kind of directly what we're working on right now.
Interesting.
Yeah. But to go back to your point about nothing traveling without a Kanban and not being able to see cues.
You sort of have cues on that whiteboard.
We have cues on the whiteboard, but clearly that's not enough. Or we are not doing a good job looking at it. And so I think, one thing we've been coming up to recently, again, this is getting into the weeds, where like I'll be programming a part, it'll use some random tool. So I'll go pick out the tool, I'll put it on a tray that's tagged with the part number, but nobody knows that I've put it there. So then someone goes and starts setting up the part and comes over and is like, grabs another tool, and they're like, is this the right tool? And I'm like, no, it's the one on the tray over here that we've kind of talked about, but we haven't really set up a procedure for.
Gotcha.
And so I think actually we have a fairly clear path, which we just have not put into place, which is to just have a rack that has a physical queue on it for tooling and materials that are queued up for a job. That doesn't have to be at each machine. It can just be like,
interesting.
Go check the rack. Is the machine one have a job prepped? No.
Right.
Work on that one.
So something we're working on that's in a similar vein is, and I think we talked about this briefly, but if you walk away from our assembly station, when you come back, is it very clear what part of the process you are in?
Right.
And the second it enables sort of like people to step in and out, people to transition easily.
Yeah.
Which makes a lot of things easier. So similarly, like I suspect, like our issue is that each step does not have a distinct place.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you walk up, it's kind of like, I don't know what those buckles are.
Right.
What are those headed to getting sewn? Are they from a previous order that got misassembled? Or like, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
Is it at 5, but there's meant to be 7? Is it like, it's just very unclear.
Yeah.
And that's the thing we're kind of working toward, is like literally if we take a list of all the steps in the process of assembling and shipping straps, every single position, every single item on that list you should be able to write next to it where where it is, where it exists, and where it rests. So I wonder if having like designated designated areas on your tool setup area or something like that's like, this is for and so you could even go get out the end mills to make sure you have them right.
No,
and not
exactly
put them into and then the next person could go look there and then set them up, or set one of them up and someone else could come take over. I don't know.
That's what we're working towards. It's going to sound silly that this is the constraint, but literally I think it's just that I haven't bought another speed rack for
Oh, we can do a group shop. We need another one too.
Okay, sounds good. We've been buying so much stuff and we don't have that much money right now. So it's like, I'm like, I need to buy another CAD computer. And then,
Yeah.
we have this whole plan for putting a PC at our tool setup station so that right now it sounds ridiculous now that I'm saying it, but like you pull up the job you're going to work at the machine and then you go to set up your tools and you're like, then you're walking back and forth from the machine to the tool setup station, which is ridiculous.
Well, it is ridiculous. That said, you just moved into a big shop and you used to be in a small shop. So I feel like these are sort of like the growing pains of that transition.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we knew it before, but it definitely was not as much of a hurdle as now.
Yeah, and the bigger hurdle was where the hell are we going to stick another computer at this station? There's no room for a screen.
Yeah.
I wonder, so I heard somewhere that like maybe you were telling me this, used gaming computers are pretty affordable.
Relatively
and good
speaking.
CAD computers.
For Fusion, I think if you're working in the more traditional softwares, you need to get something with a dedicated CAD graphics card. Oh. And that might even be true with Fusion as well. I think it's less so.
Gotcha.
I haven't been doing the research personally. My employee Aiden has been doing it.
Interesting.
That being said, the price of what we're buying has been slowly incrementing.
Yeah.
So we'll see what we end up with.
Yeah, but between the pandemic and like natural language models, large, what are they called? LLMs? Large? I don't know.
Don't know.
Language models. Anyway, yeah, computing is like all the graphics and stuff, the GPUs are hard to get. I think
they're easier
alleviated
to get now than they were. Yeah. Especially when crypto mining first started.
Right.
That was really something.
Yeah. The other thing, I wonder if you do, like, not to say you don't. You probably do because you've been growing quite a bit. But like it would be I wonder if there's anything you could eliminate on your speed rack. I know for us moving away from batching and towards single piece flow, every time we do it at every station, when we thought we needed a whole bunch more bins, we were suddenly like, oh, now we have a ton of extra bins because we don't need bins anymore. So I just wonder if you could alleviate it that way. I don't know if it's worth it, and honestly, like the cost of a speed rack relative to like your operating costs, probably just buy the speed rack and then discover you don't need it in 3 months. And
it's more about like physical placement. Like we have space on speed racks in other places. They're just not at the place where we would want it to
I see what you're saying. Right. Yes.
And those speed racks need to be where they are.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Big shot problems.
And buying versus building?
A speed rack?
Yeah.
Why
would you build it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
They're so cheap.
Yeah. The one I bought was way too flimsy.
We have broken one. Yep.
Yeah.
That's real.
We store stock on it.
Yeah, same.
And it just bowed and broke.
We took the wheels off. That helped.
Oh, no. These are like the rails.
Oh, wow.
The 90-degree rails start to like bend, like twist down. They haven't gone through yet. Maybe I should be proactive about this, but
maybe. Anyway, it's Quorum did a calculation a couple days ago. He was running short cycles on 2 machines that were at the far ends of the row.
Okay.
100 parts each. And he was like, if I do these all today and I walk back and forth between each one, I'm going to walk 2.5 miles.
Wow.
Just doing this. And I was like, oh, that's real.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
wow, that almost gets into like scheduling parts on machines based on their location in the shop, not just based on available machines.
Yeah. Well, we immediately had a discussion about maybe rearranging because it is feeling like it's nice to have all the space, but it is like a little unnecessary in some ways, and maybe it would be better if we did a big U or something. I don't know. I got to think about future expansion capability and like how that would fit in, but also that might be a ways off, and maybe we just like rearrange it for now and then rearrange it later if we add another machine at some point.
Yeah, I believe the way, I don't know enough about how Toyota lays out plants.
Yeah.
But I wonder, this gets back into that curve of like specialized versus versatile.
Yeah.
Because you could build more cells, right?
Yeah.
Or you could treat it as we have all these machines and sometimes they feed one another and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
And
it's more that.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to note that our initial thought of like kind of how parts would flow through the shop is only partially true.
Interesting. What's different? Or what did you think would happen?
So we have kind of like a long aisle with machines on one side and workstations on the other.
Okay.
And then manual machines kind of form the end of the workstation aisle.
Yeah.
Which is in the middle of the room. And our thought had been parts would kind of like run down the aisle.
Okay.
And then loop around the center to the other side of the workstations where we have a shipping station.
I see.
But what we ended up doing was just that workstation row has brakes in it. And we don't really end up going around the end of it ever.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes sense. Like that's
right.
just extra walking. So now we're kind of like, well, now the machines at the end are kind of just like off in no man's land.
Interesting.
Maybe we need to bring them back in and
maybe put the shipping at the end or something?
Put the shipping at the end, or make the machines in L and put the manual machines kind of more off in their land because we barely ever use them.
Uh-huh.
They don't need to be centrally located.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We'll see.
Interesting.
Right now we have like so many bigger fish to fry, but I don't want to lose sight of it completely.
Yeah, I don't know how to balance that because like if your constraint is people and time and
right.
people are spending like
good portions.
20 or 30 minutes of their day walking.
Yeah.
And you can drop that to 10 minutes, like you alleviate 20 minutes. I don't know that, but
Right.
for all that work.
Yeah.
But then something I keep experiencing. Okay, we added, well, which we'll get into next episode. We added a log on the CNC.
Uh-huh.
Which is literally just a Google Doc.
Yeah.
Where if anything goes wrong or anything changes or you just want to make a note, you just put a date and a note.
Yeah.
We've been talking about it for like a month.
Uh-huh.
Sam just made it. And I was typing on it and I was like, how has it taken us this long? This is ridiculous. I mean, okay, creating a Google Doc and moving a bunch of CNCs are very different in terms of the effort involved, but
just go do it.
There's so many big improvements that I've made and like talked about and thought about for a long time, and then you make it and you're like, okay, I feel stupid. I don't know how to balance. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
moving everything it's
a thing.
Is hard. Yeah.
Anyway, that's a good place to wrap up for today. Thanks everybody for coming along on this wild ride or mundane ride, depending on your perspective.
Yep.
You can find me at likenprecision.com on the internet and lichen_MFG on Instagram.
And you can find me at austeremfg.com on the internet and austere_manufacturing on Instagram. The podcast at Incremental CI on Instagram. You can email us at improvesomethingtoday.
Fix something today.
Which check out in the description for the actual email. We have a Patreon.
Indeed.
In fact, we have a new Patreon member. Thank you to Janitor Debris for joining our Patreon. Appreciate the support, and if you get value out of this, please consider joining. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast,
you may have forgotten because we rambled along for so long.
Yes, please shoot us an email with what you do, what field you're in, what you find interesting about the podcast, and also, if you're not in machining, if you find these deep in the weeds discussions of machining distracting, annoying, mildly interesting, or something else. It can be bullet points, it can be one sentence. It's all super helpful. So thanks so much for listening. We will talk to you next episode.
Adios.